Hello and welcome to this edition of Rise Up with Rebecca Seawright on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm Assemblymember Rebecca Seawright, serving the Upper East Side, Yorkville, and Roosevelt Island. This broadcast is in honor of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which brings the pandemic of sexual assault into sharp focus each year throughout the month of April. I've introduced legislation in Albany defining consent. New York State's Assembly currently has the bill where it's currently pending, and the Senate version has been introduced by Senator James Sanders Jr. of Queens. These bills have been championed by the folks who have been organized by the Consent Awareness Network and supporters who have joined them. Some of these supporters are with us today. We have a very special show in store for you. Andrea Constand is the plaintiff in the Cosby case, the author of The Moment, and the founder of the advocacy platform and app Hope, Healing, and Transformation. Joyce Short, Consent Awareness Network founder, a TEDx Talk presenter, and the author of Your Consent, the Key to Conquering Sexual Assault, which provides guidance to the public and legislators on establishing new laws. Susan Prout, the founder of I Have the Right, to whose daughter, Chessie, was sexually assaulted at St. Paul's School in New Hampshire when she was 15 years old. And Nina Lucas from the Consent Awareness Network, Chief of Staff and the Head Consent Outreach Ambassador for Pennsylvania. We're going to lead off today with Andrea. What can you tell us about consent and how it was treated in your legal case?
When the jurors were deliberating in my trial, in the second trial, the jurors had asked for a definition for consent, and the judge actually replied to use your common sense. And I was just astounded. So the jurors were left with no way to define consent. And it was just very disappointing in my case.
Right, and we certainly hope to change that with this legislation. Joyce, I understand you've attended the Weinstein hearings. What can you tell us about how consent was treated in these legal cases?
In the Weinstein hearing, the jury was told exactly the same thing. They were told to use their common sense, ironically. And I wanted to go back to something that happened in Andrea's case, and that was that the foreperson for the jury in Andrea's case, fortunately, was familiar with the definition in general data protection regulation. She was a cybersecurity expert. And so when the judge told them to use their common sense or to use their use their best reasoning ability, they were led by a person who had a very educated sense of what consent actually was. In the Weinstein case, unfortunately, we need to listen to the lessons that we learned. Harvey Weinstein told us very flatly that he thinks that he was totally confused and that all men are confused about these issues. And our legislators need to heed what he said and do what's necessary in order to define consent. Because the reason he was so confused is because our laws don't define consent. We actually found 162 uses of the word consent in the laws of New York when we engaged in that study. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg told us pretty clearly that we change nothing until we change our laws. And that's been never truer than in these issues pertaining to sexual assault, sex trafficking, domestic violence. We need to know what consent actually means.
And Joyce, tell us about the button that you're wearing on your lapel and what that stands for. And also Nina has one on as well.
Yes, it actually stands for the definition for consent. And it's the definition that's in Bill A6540A and 6200. It's freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement. And it's supported by Nuremberg Code, by Model Penal Code, by General Data Protection Regulation, by my TEDx talk, and it's was certainly supported by your parents as you were growing up. You know, we teach our kids, don't hit your sister, don't scare your baby brother, don't raid the cookie jar when I'm fast asleep taking a nap, and don't sign your parents' name to your report card. All of those things have to do with consent, because consent, if you understand that consent is freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement, then you also understand that you can't use force, fear, fraud, or exploit somebody's incapacity and call their compliance with your wishes consent. So, you know, that's basically the structure that underlies when something becomes a criminal offense. Has to do with when you actually are behaving in a way that undermines the person's consent, and you go ahead and you do it anyway. So we need to have the same kind of enforcement that our parents set when we were children growing up. They set the boundaries, but unfortunately, as people age and mature and go out into the family of man, we don't have our parents around anymore to enforce those boundaries, and society relies on our laws to create those boundaries. And that's why it's so imperative that our laws define consent correctly as freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement.
And Joyce, what is the Consent Awareness Network doing to bring about change all over the country, not just in New York?
Well, you're seeing all the faces here that we brought together, and this is, you know, one small portion, a very vocal portion, and we're happy to have the support of each one of these folks that are here, that have done just a yeoman's job of helping us get this message across in many ways and to many people, and in what they do, and helping us, you know, broaden the outreach. And stand behind the concepts that we're promoting. So we're reaching out to legislators throughout the country and even around the world. We have outreach ambassadors in several states. Next week, we're talking to folks in Arkansas. We're talking to people in the federal government. We're talking to people in California, in New Jersey, in many, many states, because quite frankly, consent is a word. It has a definition. Like every word, there's not 500 ways that you can that you can define it. It's freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement. And whether you're living in California, or you're living in New Jersey, or you're living in New York, you know, that's the definition. And we need some continuity so that we have consistency in how we carry out our laws. And so the more people that we can add to this messaging, if people have the interest, if they're not in New York and they have the interest in bringing it to their state, contact me, info@consentawareness.net, and we'll be working with you to reach out to your legislators and create change in whatever jurisdiction you're in.
Thank you, Joyce. And Susan, can you tell us how consent was treated in New Hampshire, and about your daughter's experience?
Well, actually, thank you for asking that question, but it wasn't treated. This, her assault happened in 2014. Her trial was in 2015. And it was less about what the perpetrator did, and the focus was on victim blaming and shaming. Had there been a definition of consent, that wouldn't have been the case. So there was my 15-year-old on the witness stand being asked, you know, why she wore what she wore, why she texted ha ha when she tried to find out if he had worn a condom, you know, other very, very personal details were asked of her, when the focus, as Joyce says, with her language, and as you have so aptly put in the bill, what was the perpetrator doing to exact, this physical act from her. So, we were way behind, and we're so grateful that you are bringing this to your General Assembly, because if New York can get this across the finish line, we will be changing culture. The judge in her case said clearly Ms. Prout did not consent. And however, the jury could not find it to convict him of felony sexual assault. They did convict him of felony use of a computer, because that was a very linear decision. But they could not understand, well, she went, well, she spoke nicely to him in text messages. So, we need a law to focus people on the act of the perpetrator and not focus on victim shaming and blaming.
Well, thank you. And I'm so sorry that your daughter had to go through that experience. And we certainly are looking to pass this legislation this session. And we think of New York State as a progressive state, first on numerous levels, especially with regard to women's rights. And so we're looking forward to passing this and having other states around the country really look to New York as a model. So Nina, I understand that your case involved a military officer in Pennsylvania. Does military law do any better when it comes to defining consent?
Thank you, Assemblymember Seawright, for that question. As a civilian who was victimized by a military officer, I've had to pull and tug at the system for any validation whatsoever on my case. Mm-hmm. But also, I know of many documented instances where federally appointed victim advocates representing survivors were retaliated against, sexually harassed, ultimately fired, and had to sue in order to get reinstated. The military has that's words and actions concept of consent, and it has an abysmal rate of sexual assault and sexual harassment in it. 1 out of 4 women and 1 out of 16 men. And keep in mind that those are just the ones that are officially reported. Mm-hmm. These rates are the worst in the country. The Uniform Code of Military Justice legal language perpetuates the military's toxic culture of victim blaming and shaming. And that's directly contributed to a significant pattern of post-assault suicides among servicemen and women. But I'm proud to say that the Consent Awareness Network is now actively working with federal legislators to define consent in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, just as it's written in New York Bill A6540A. Freely given, knowledgeable, informed agreement. And this will put the attention back where it belongs, away from the victim and back on the behavior of the perpetrator.
Wonderful. And Andrea, can you tell us a little bit more about the app that you created, Hope, Healing, and Transformation?
Yes, thanks for asking. So we just at around the beginning of the pandemic, actually, we started an app with resources for survivors to go into the app and get emotional and legal free legal assistance. We also have a trauma-informed library. We also have a mind, body, spirit program that everybody can sign up for. We've had over 400 people sign up for our modules that they do within the app, where they can take away resources in terms of how to take care of themselves and have self-care. And that's imperative, because it's important to take care of ourselves, mind, body, and spirit. But we've had many people sign up for free legal assistance and access top 100 trial lawyers in the US and Canada. And the app has been a really great success, and the timing couldn't be better. So thanks for asking.
Terrific. And we'll feature your app in our Friday e-news and share it with the other women legislators that make up the Women's Legislative Caucus in Albany. How can fellow survivors and New Yorkers help the network to further their mission? And I'll ask all of you to chime in on this. Joyce, you want to lead off?
Sure. Well, first of all, we need to get across to, in our laws have to kind of change the narrative. Right now, a lot of New York State, as well as a lot of states, base guilt or innocence on the words and actions of the victim. And that's grossly untrue. It's the influence that creates those words and actions. If you're using malicious influence, then the result of that malicious influence is not going to determine whether or not that person consented. So the things that our viewers should be doing is, number one, getting in touch with you, Assembly Member, and sending letters of support to pass the legislation A6540A and S6200A, so that you have the ammunition that you need in order to convince the legislators that they need to be supporting this legislation. Because it's a two-pronged fight. It's getting the public on board so that the public understands and demands change, and getting our legislators on board in order to actually create the laws and make a difference. So I do think that reading the book would be helpful. The other thing, of course, is that we're happy to get support in the terms of financial support. We have a GoFundMe page. If you go to GoFundMe to Our Justice System is Broken, is our GoFundMe page. And I don't care whether it's a nickel or whether it's $5 or $500, anything that you can spare in order to help us wage this battle would be used entirely to make the world a safer place and protect you, your children, and your children's children. So please make those contributions.
And I see that you have your book right behind you on the screen, Your Consent. And also I see that you have, it looks like your daughter's picture in your book behind you as well.
That's right. And Assemblywoman Seawright, if I could just add, we all care about kids' safety, right? This bill will ensure the safety of our kids in the future. Kids are so confused right now. They are asking for adults. You can check out I Have the Right to social media. We have a map of where children are standing up all over the United States, and they are asking for we adults to lead the way in measures of safety. This will keep our boys safe, our girls safe, by defining consent in our penal code. And it's the least we can do. It's been blurry and confusing for too many years. And we believe your right to consent is a civil right. And it's every person's right to have bodily autonomy and consent, the right to consent for their bodies. So we are thrilled. And if parents can think of it in terms of their children, this is an amazing way forward for the future.
Terrific. That's great. And we'll certainly carry those thoughts. Would others like to add to that?
I'd like to suggest that you follow us on social media. We're very active there on Instagram. Joyce is at Your Consent. I am at Stand Firm Voice. You can also find that account on Twitter as well. And if you could follow our accounts to learn what's new, how you can help, and to just perhaps share our content, like our content, that would be very helpful. Use the hashtags. Codify consent, hashtag codify consent, and hashtag FGKIA. Finally, I would say you can find this in our links to sign our petition. We have a petition going to support your bill. And again, we feel that if we can just get this pushed through in New York, this will give a great example of a template that other states and even countries can replicate. And we think that will really create a groundswell and get that going in other parts of the United States and the world.
Right, and I couldn't agree more. And I think it's so important for people to reach out to their legislator from their district and ask their legislator if they've signed on to this bill as a co-sponsor in both the Assembly and in the Senate. And then look at the Judiciary Committee and who makes it, who is a member of that committee, as well as the Legislative Women's Caucus, because it's just a no-brainer that this is something that needs to happen. And the time it couldn't be more timely. This legislative session, you've all made such wonderful, wonderful points today, and it's really time for New York to get this done. We're looking forward. We have 6 weeks left of legislative session for this year. We end on June 2nd, And so there is plenty of time to get this done now that we've passed the state budget. And so I think it's key to have as many co-sponsors sign on to these two pieces of legislation. I know that Planned Parenthood is planning an advocacy day coming up to Albany, to the state capitol on May 10th. And so I think it's time that we plan an advocacy day for the Consent Awareness Network. And I love the title with awareness in it, because we need to bring awareness to this issue and to this topic. And that's why I'm so appreciative today to have all of you on sharing your own experiences and your expertise on this very important topic. Joyce, I'd like to ask you, how can we involve young people in the Consent Awareness Network? Do you have any publications that are really geared to our younger population?
We actually do. We have a cartoon. So it's it's a fun cartoon, and it's really made so that the parent or a teacher watches that cartoon along with their kids. It's not anything having to do with, sexual content. It really is about going to the store, riding a bike, going to the sandbox. It's things that kids encounter in their day-to-day lives. It's called Your Consent for Kids on YouTube. And I recommend that you watch it with your kids, and that it will spark the conversation and enable them to understand that. And it also covers really something that we haven't covered so far, and that's that there are different types of agreement. There's assent, which means agreement on the face of it. And then there's acquiescence, which means agreement under duress. And there's also consent, which is freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement. So it makes it kind of crystal clear to kids as they're growing up that just because you get somebody to comply with you or agree with you, that does not mean that they have consented. And that's an important lesson for children to understand going forward as they become adults.
If I might add as well, I'm down here in Washington, D.C. Today, and I'm watching states like Maryland bringing legislation forward saying, teach us consent. Well, how can we teach our children consent if we don't have an agreed upon definition? So, what we're really trying to do is clarify things for students and create a culture of consent, right, Joyce? It's a culture that deals with things way, much more in depth than just physical actions between two people. It's a way of respectfully interacting with people. And believe it or not, during these COVID times, haven't they taught us about how we have to negotiate our space with one another?
Absolutely, yes.
Really just an extension, but we need to get the definition right.
I would like to take that one step further and say that we won't get justice. We won't get justice without consent. And that's why we're here. And that's important. If survivors are going to come forward to say that they've been sexually assaulted, raped, been touched inappropriately, they have to know, they have to be able to have the confidence that if they're going to agree, and we know that there's so many barriers in place already just by going to the police and saying anything. One thing they need to know is that by the time they get into court, there's going to be a definition for consent. And there won't be Cheryl Carmels, who was the foreperson for my jury. There might not be a Cheryl Carmel on every jury. And so I think if we're going to make justice achievable for victims,
Right.
this is such an important process. I believe in the awareness, I believe in the education, but I believe in changing the penal code and getting a definition into the penal code. And I really do believe that real change can happen.
And what effect do you think this will have on other aspects of our criminal law, like human trafficking and other issues under the penal code?
When we initially had the bill introduced, we had someone in the prosecutor's office, in Cy Vance's office, that actually looked through the laws throughout New York State and found 162 times in which the word consent was used in our laws. And so it 100% will apply to sex trafficking, to domestic violence, to any number of things, kidnapping, arson, theft, everything has to do with consent. And non-consensual behavior is behavior that, and particularly non-consensual sexual behavior, is a form of sexual assault. And in the look back laws, right now, we're seeing extensions to the statute of limitations, and we're seeing the creation of these look back laws, which enable people to come forward with their cases that have been overlooked for years and years and years. But here's the problem. If we do not define consent, they're not going to get a better outcome now than they ever got before. So if you're going to look back, you need to look back with a new set of eyes on what consent actually is, so that you can create justice for the victims and you can hold these people accountable when they're predators. So it's absolutely essential. If you want to look back law and you want to extend the statute of limitations, you have to have the ammunition to actually convict people when someone goes through that re-traumatization. We don't want to re-traumatize people with no positive outcome. We need to be able to actually hold people accountable. And going back to what Nina had said, once we define it in New York, it will echo throughout the halls of justice all around the world. And we need to start somewhere in New York. Thankfully for you and your bravery, sincerely, for bringing this bill and introducing it in New York.
Thank you. And again, I just so appreciate your organization and your advocacy around the country on behalf of the Consent Awareness Network. We're going to get this legislation done. And I invite all of you to Albany to watch the debate as it reaches the floor, because this is something that we have to do. And we have to do on behalf of our women and families around the country. And we will get it done. It's been an informative discussion, and I look forward to continuing to work with each of you on defining consent and getting this legislation passed. So thank you to our special guests for speaking with us this evening and for your outstanding advocacy and leadership. And thank you to our viewers for watching Rise Up with Rebecca Seawright on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Thank you.